do we read the mind of our prospects that way, though? How do we figure out what those triggers are going to be? How do you help companies define those triggers for themselves?
Yeah, I think it starts with an analysis of the companies you've already talked to. Hopefully you're recording all of your sales calls. Hopefully you have all of the necessary data in your systems.
Hello and welcome back to tomorrow's Best Practices Today. I'm Clark Newby. And today we've got with us Roark Pollock. Roark's founder and CEO of P1 Growth Marketing, where he's a fractional CMO. It's a fractional CMO firm, primarily working with cybersecurity and B2B SaaS startups, very early stage, seed to up to Series B or so. So right at the front end, right when things are really getting going, you're getting the flywheel moving. He's seen a lot. Has more than 20 years of marketing background. He's been a CEO. He's had a successful exit selling Zifton to Fidelis Security. And like me, he has an engineering background. So he thinks systematically and diagnostically about marketing, speaking the language that I love. Welcome to the podcast, Roark.
Well, thank you very much, Clark. I appreciate the invitation, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, it's great to have you here. We appreciate you taking the time. And like you, I've worked in this fractional CMO space some through points in my career. And it's always interesting how you kind of come to an engagement. In my experience, it's interesting how you come to an engagement. And sometimes the things that lead you to become engaged with a firm, particularly early stage, that when there's a lot to be sorted, the compelling event may not be the thing that really becomes compelling once you start working with them to elevate them, solve their problems, et cetera. I was curious if you find the same thing, and what do you find needs to be addressed when you're coming in with your clients? Is it often the thing that they're thinking of, or is there so much going on in these early stage companies that you might discover more once you get there?
Yeah, Clark, I think you're spot on. There's a lot going on in these early stage companies. What I found is founders a lot of times are convinced, especially from a marketing perspective, that they've got an execution problem or maybe a people problem. But I think 9 times out of 10, where they're struggling is they've got a market learning problem. They figure if marketing just ran harder, they work smarter, the pipeline's going to show up, we're going to build pipeline. And in most cases, they've really got a learning problem. And, they just haven't nailed kind of who buys from them or refined that definition. They don't understand why they buy, or they don't know what makes them buy right now. And so they kind of reach for demand generation a lot of times to just fix the problem. If I just pour more money into it, it'll fix the problem. Or if I change the people, that'll fix the problem. And most times it doesn't. What happens is if you start to scale before you actually have learned what makes your business grow, you don't end up speeding up. What happens is you bury the signal that you need, or the signals that you need to identify to figure out what's actually wrong and how do you go about fixing it.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying. It so often presents as a people concern or problem. I think that's because at the end of the day, people are responsible for making things happen in the organization. Like, I don't know, Chet, he got us here, but I don't know if he's the guy that can get us there. It's like, well, wait, what are you actually asking him to do? What's the marketing organization? What is he or she actually got in the tank that they can burn? And so you said, learning about the organization. So talk to me about the things that a company typically needs to learn, because a lot of things, we usually start in ICP, ideal customer profile, but I sense what you're talking about is more involved in that.
Yeah, I think there's 4 or 5 areas that I think people need to learn. There's the ICP, there's your positioning and your messaging and refining that. There are what demand gen channels are going to work for you. But by and large, when I think about a learning organization from a marketing perspective, I won't claim this is my own idea. It comes down to with early go to market, it's a function of repeatability. And Bruce Cleveland, who wrote the book The Traction Gap, he calls this minimal viable repeatability, or MVP, which is he identifies as a missing stage at the corporate level or the company level. And there's a gentleman named Matt Callaghan who I heard at the Marketing Cybersecurity Conference speak back in December of last year. He calls this, he works with sales teams, and he calls this the Vanguard-led stage. And essentially, he said that typically, as a startup burns through its early stages, it'll go through 3 VPs of sales before it gets to a Series C. And the third one is going to be the best one because the first 2 end up paying the price for not reaching repeatability. And I think that same concept exists for marketing. It's this idea that marketing has to have a mirror of that sales mentality or the company mentality of MVP or MVR. And so for me, I call it marketing MVR, or minimal viable repeatability. And I look for 4 signals. The first one is your marketing and your demand generation repeatable? And by that, I mean, have you got 1 or 2 marketing channels that you've identified that are producing qualified pipeline, not just leads and MQLs, but qualified pipeline that's closing, and it's doing so in a second item that I look for is in a predictable way, meaning if I pour more money into that channel or those channels, I understand the conversion rates by channel. I understand the opportunity close rate by channel, the deal velocity by channel. And I can understand that if I put that money into those channels, I'm going to get a commensurate return from those channels pretty consistently. The third thing I look for is business fit. In other words, are the channels that you're using, do they fit the deal economics for your business? And here you're looking at the average deal size by channel that is being produced, the acquisition cost or CAC and CAC payback by channel, and then the LTV to CAC ratio is sometimes used as well to understand the dynamics of the channels that you're using. So do they fit your business? You don't want a channel that's going to be too expensive if you scale it for the deal economics. And then the fourth is I like to see if the channels that you're using are non-founder developed. In other words, is the marketing team and the channels that you're using repeatable without the founder? Just in the same way that you want the sales team to be able to sell repeatably without the founder being involved, which signals that the sales has reached a certain level of repeatability. I think the same is true for marketing. You don't want to be relying on the founder's personal network or their super charisma to bring deals in every time and build your pipeline.
As you said, find the stuff that's working. What's the stuff that just clearly isn't that you can cut? And then what would you use that resource to apply to either scale what's working or try something new? And it's very hard. I think we went through a phase where marketing would have a little bit of a slush fund a few years ago to try some of these new things. Then things got very tight. And now with AI, I think there's a new opportunity, and you might be kind of coating it with a different coat of paint to try some of this stuff. But you can get a resource multiplier with AI that you couldn't by having to explain why you need to go hire an agency or something to try some of these new things, and taking that portfolio approach, that structural portfolio approach. I mean, I love kind of the engineering thinking, the financial thinking behind that as well.
Yeah, I think AI is impacting not only marketing teams, but it's also impacting the buyer journey. I think it's really putting more power. Yeah, I think it's really putting more power into the hands of the buyer, and it's moving the buyer journey upstream in a way. I looked at the Sixth Sense did some B2B buyer research. I think it was published by Kerry Cunningham late last year, and they demonstrated or found that buyers are roughly 2/3, 65%, I think is the number they put on it, through their buyer journey before they ever contact a vendor. So, by that point, they've done their research. They've put together a short list. They've probably identified a favorite on their short list. And they did all of that without you in the room.
That's right.
And
you had no idea. You had no idea.
Yeah. You weren't a part of the process at all.
Yeah.
But you've got to win that part of the journey. You've got to be able, you can't see it, but you've got to be able to win it when they're out there trying to educate themselves. How do you get on that short list? Because if you're not, you're in trouble. The thing that bothered me the most of that research, or this, I guess the scariest thing from that research for sales and marketing teams, was B2B buyers, according to them, select a favorite vendor before they engage with all the people on their short list. And that pre-contact favorite, you know what they found? That pre-contact favorite wins the deal 80% of the time. That means if you're not the favorite going into that deal, you've got, a 20% chance of winning the deal. And if you're not on the short list, you're not on the short list. So AI is just making it so easy for companies to use LLMs to educate themselves, to learn about your category, to do research, to build the short list, and to build their favorite. And now they can easily compare vendors, from the data LLMs have available, and build that favorite. Whereas used to, I think perhaps they had to talk to the sales teams to learn more about the product and to figure out what criteria they should use and how you stack up against your competitors. And that's just no longer the case anymore.
It was always so frustrating to me working in cybersecurity, because it's like, there would be a big hack or something. You're like, now people will finally understand why they have to address this. People just kind of whistle past the graveyard. Or you'd have this great experience with a customer. Like, now, when they hear this, it's like, we're not talking about any of this. And there's this big value that you can be delivering to your prospects, unlocking it through anonymous case studies, these kind of sites. I think particularly in that industry is important, but it's an important thing for all of us in our various industries to remember. I just think that's a superpower if you can get your customer take documented out on the internet for you. It'll do that work for you.
100%. And I think you touched on something else there, Clark, which is this idea of, understanding why customers are buying from you. One of the things that we talk about as part of the learning, or, when marketing's in that learning phase, and even afterwards, you're always testing, you're always, trying to refine, even if you've gone past marketing MDR. But as you define the ICP, one of the things I find so often, I won't say customers get wrong, but they kind of stop before they're finished when they're working on their ICP, is that, everybody defines, hey, what's the size of the organization I want to go after? How many employees, what's the revenue of the companies we want to target? What's the geography? What industries are they working in? Maybe even they pull in firmographic data and they try to figure out, hey, we want to target people that have Cisco infrastructure or Salesforce or whatever the tooling infrastructure is they have. But a lot of times people stop short of defining why the buyer shows up today. What is that trigger that makes them want to buy now as opposed to in the future? And, that profile defines kind of your reach of who you can go after. But the trigger, that's the 5% that are in market today that are ready to buy. And that trigger helps you figure out who those 5% are and not have to spend a lot of demand gen dollars on the other 95%. You spend your awareness dollars on the other 95%.
Yeah. That's such a tough, I mean, you're absolutely right that it goes back to the, why anything, why us, why now sort of questioning that you need to do. And that why now and why us stuff, that's where you really have to look in the mirror, right? As a company, why would they rate why is this more important than the other dozen things that they're doing? Why is there an external forcing function? Is there an internal need? That's such heavy lifting. That's kind of that's the big part of the iceberg, right? Underneath all of this, like, oh, we're for companies between 5 and 50 folks who are, like you say, built on Salesforce or something like that. How do we read the mind of our prospects that way, though? How do we figure out what those triggers are going to be? How do you help companies define those triggers for themselves?
Yeah, I think it starts with an analysis of the companies you've already talked to. Hopefully you're recording all of your sales calls. Hopefully you have all of the necessary data in your systems. But I was working for one company. I'm not going to say who it was, but in the past.
That should be good.
Yeah. They were a Series A detection and response company. Their target market was kind of SMB, mid-market. They were serving a smaller part of the market. Well, the larger part of the market, but smaller customers. I think anywhere from 50 employees up to about 5,000 employees. And they were focused primarily domestically in Canada. And spending money on demand generation, but their results were kind of flat. They were generating more leads, but their conversion in their qualified pipeline wasn't really growing. And we started looking at the customers that had bought and why they were bought and why they had purchased and what they had in common. And this is not going to come as a surprise, but in cyber, there are often pretty concrete triggers that you can hang your hat on. In this case, they found that within about the last 3 or 4 months before customers had purchased, most of them had some sort of compliance issue. An audit finding that they failed or that they needed to make changes to comply, or they had a compromise or some sort of near miss event. Mm-hmm. And so we rebuilt their ICP around those triggers, and it oftentimes feels like something you don't want to do because it tends to tighten the people you're going after and it makes your target smaller. Which, a lot of times you want to say, well, we can sell to everybody, which is tough for the marketing team because you can't target everybody very well. But we rebuilt their ICP and some of the messaging, and our inbound dropped and our number of leads dropped. We're going after a smaller pool. Of course, that's going to happen. But the amount of qualified deals that we were able to produce actually went up, and our close rate went from about 8 to about 24% in about 2 quarters. Yeah, it was great. But it was scary at first for the client, for myself, but that dip in volume on the leads and the MQLs, I considered that to be a win, not the actual cost of doing this, because not only did we get the number of deals up in the qualified pipeline, but we saved the salespeople time talking to a bunch of people that weren't going to buy anyway.
Right.
Right. And that's a big win.
We talked about G2 and Gartner Peer Insights and the kind of the voice of the customer and all that. I wanted to dig in a little bit more on that because it also got me thinking about like customer advisory boards. I think particularly in early stage companies I've worked with, like you said, hopefully you're listening to the sales conversations and you know your customers really well. And one thing you typically do then is bring those customers in to advise you on often the product roadmap. And that's kind of often where, particularly with a founder mentality, you can stop. How do you extend past that, or have you worked with clients to really get more juice out of that, out of the customer point of view?
Yeah, I think two things. Early in my career doing product marketing, it was how much time could you spend with customers and listening to them, whether it's at trade shows, in person on sales calls, whatever. Now I think there's a couple of different ways that have become much more scalable. Customer advisory boards, you mentioned, that's one where we've always had customer advisory boards. I've been doing those for 20 years. I've done them in a number of different companies. And you're right, they're often framed as a roadmap exercise for the product team. But in my opinion, that can undersell the value of those cabs. It can be a big payoff for the go-to-market team. If you can just sit and listen to that information, feed it back into your understanding of the voice of the customer, into your positioning, into how you want to build your proof points, whether it's what you're asking people to review on G2 or the case studies you write. It can be a real good tool for companies. But now, having said that, I've got some rules that I always kind of try to hold firm on in cabs. And one of them is no salespeople in the room. I always keep them in the loop when I'm running customer advisory boards, because anytime I'm talking or I have any kind of formal communications with a customer, I want to CC all my salespeople that own that account. But I think customers will say things in the room when their sales account rep is not there that they wouldn't say otherwise.
Sure.
And I think you get a more reliable view of what they think when the sales reps aren't there.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true.
It comes as a shock sometimes to people.
Well, it's like you say, you have to have respect for the relationships that exist with this important customer. If you're early stage, every customer is important. But there's just, I same thing, right? I completely agree, right? We've even gone so far in some subsettings at some of my companies to take prospects and customers and just put them together without any of us in the room. It's like, just talk to them. Just we get out of the way altogether, because they're going to say much. And, you have to have confidence in what you're delivering. You have to have confidence in the relationship you've got with these customers, but it's 10 times more impactful to just have them comfortable talking operator to operator, or to have users talk user to builder directly.
Yeah, if you've got a community of people that you can create, the community of users where they're generating dialogue and you can listen to that dialogue without even being part of it, that's a fantastic opportunity. The other one these days is you can record all of your sales calls so easy with the tools that exist today. And if you haven't been doing it, you should be doing it, because now that becomes a knowledge base for AI to understand, why are customers buying? What are their concerns? What are their aspirations? What are they looking to solve? You can get so many fine details out of analyzing that deep data that it's just more difficult to do if you have to do it all manually. If you've got half a dozen salespeople and you have to go through every single sales call, that's tough. But if you can get AI to do it and to surface some of those key items, it's just so easy to do and so doable today. There's no reason not to be doing it.
Yeah, that makes me think of your discussion about all the different places that, particularly an earlier stage company, can apply AI. One of the conversations we have a lot at Leadtail and on the podcast are which trends, solutions, et cetera, are overrated versus underrated. And so I'm just thinking about you working in this kind of more specific space of early stage, right at the pointy end of the spear, when companies really, I mean, if they get it wrong, they're not going to just not scale. They may not survive. They've got all this AI capability now available to them. What do you think, particularly for early stage companies, is are overrated AI applications, solutions, approaches versus underrated?
I would say that's a great question. I would say overrated is using AI for content, to generate raw volume, to generate MQLs. My concern with
too much. You don't like slop? What's the matter with you?
Yeah, I was about to say AI slop, even though I don't care for the term, but I do like to say, if everybody's using AI for their content, everybody's going to regress to the mean, so we all become average. So if you want average marketing, you can get that from AI. I think that's great. Go for it. Underrated, I would say, is using AI to improve your positioning and sales enablement. I think if you can continue to train your salespeople through using AI to analyze sales calls, to learn from sales calls, the way things are being positioned. Positioning and sales enablement are two things that we do it and then we think we're done. And it's something that
thank God, right?
Yeah, thank God that's
got the deck
us.
done for the new release or whatever, you're done.
But you've got to continually revisit those items and learn from the conversations the last quarter and see what we can improve. And another one I would throw in there as underrated is win-loss analysis. If you're evaluating and collecting all of this communications data between your sales teams and your company and your prospects, you can start to glean a lot from win-loss data and analyzing it over all of your prospects using AI. So I've seen some companies doing some real nice things there. And that's an area, again, it's super doable. There's no reason not to be doing it.
This has been such a great conversation, Roark. When you're not thinking about these early stage companies, when you're not applying all this rigor to the work that you do, I know you're down there in Austin, super fun place. What are you doing outside? What do you do when you're stepping away from this stuff?
Yeah, a lot lately. All of us have been talking about AI and what happens with AI. And, I think AI is just democratizing the ability to build SaaS businesses. And I think you're going to see an explosion of micro SaaS businesses. And I say that because I've been looking at it and saying, what is it that I enjoy doing outside of just work, where I could go build a product or build the SaaS, using low code, no code, vibe coding to build a SaaS product. And you don't need a billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar TAM, and you don't need to raise venture capital money. If you're in a community, you're positioned in a prime spot to identify problems. And so go solve them. If there's $1 million TAM, a $3 million TAM, you can make a good business on that, and it doesn't cost very much. So I'm into classic cars, and I've got a couple of my own, and I have identified a problem that I'm trying to right now see if I've built a demo. What I'm trying to figure out now is whether there's a willingness to pay in the market. But it's not a get rich quick scheme. It's taking a lot of what I've kind of learned as working with founders, and now trying to apply it myself and have fun with it.
That's fantastic. Well, classic car guys, and they're mostly guys, typically have some money in their pockets. So that sounds promising. Yeah, the micro set, the barriers to entry have just completely fallen away, right? I mean, in the same way you no longer, like AWS, you don't have to worry about building your own data center or anything, or building compute capacity. You can just rent that. All of these tools are lowering the barriers to entry to get good ideas out into the marketplace much more easily, where they can fight it out. That's exciting. That's cool to hear. Well,
it's fun.
We'll have you back on later then to talk about your classic car micro SaaS business.
I'll take you up on that.
But in the meantime, P1 Growth Marketing, right? So where can folks find you? Because you've shared so many great thoughts and resources. Where can folks find you at P1? And maybe what are some tools or so? How do you typically engage with folks so they could think about a way to get started with you?
Like I said,
to solve some of these issues.
Like I said, I primarily work with seed, Series A, Series B companies, cyber companies, B2B SaaS, AI companies more recently. You can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest. Roark Pollock on LinkedIn. There's only one. That's the benefit of having a unique name.
First and only.
Yeah, first and only. And p1growthmarketing.com. You can find me at either one of those. Just reach out. And that's how most of my conversations start. And
I hope our audience takes advantage of the opportunity to learn more from you. This has been a great conversation. Thank you for taking the time, Roark. And thanks to everybody that's listened through and learned so much today. We've had the pleasure of chatting with Roark Pollock of P1 Growth Marketing. Thanks again, Roark, and take care, everyone. We'll see you on the other side.
Thank you, Clark.